Welcome to Beneath the Noise. Before we get started, I have to make one thing clear. My story is a sanitized one. I am a white woman in middle America, still on her mother's upper middle class American insurance at the time of my psychotic break. My experience is not the norm for many who go through psychosis. Many of those who find themselves psychotic end up incarcerated and are taken advantage of. I have also eliminated or changed many details to protect my privacy and the privacy of those involved. Please also know that while I attempt to tell this story as directly as possible, my memories are severely disjointed and fragmented, which reflects heavily in my writings. This next part, I'm not saying for shock value. I have nothing to sell you. But the truth is, it could happen to you too. I really mean it could happen to anyone. Psychosis affects 15 to 100 people out of every 100,000. It mostly strikes in the late teens to mid-20s, but it can happen at any age. An unchecked UTI under the right circumstances can send someone into psychosis. It is not some distant, impossible thing. It is real. And it is closer than people think. Psychosis is a break with reality. It is when someone loses touch with what grounds them in the world we live in. It can cause someone to act or speak very strangely and without reason. It has the potential to be dangerous for both the psychotic person and the people around them, due to the subject lacking understanding of the true circumstances of their situation, and therefore the consequences of their actions. I had a warm home and sensible people who loved me and could dedicate time to me. I got to have my episode mostly in private. I am not on the streets and I am not in jail. I spent 2 weeks in a hospital over Christmas. Some would argue that psychiatric hospitals function as carceral systems. I won't explore that argument yet, but it's worth acknowledging. I am a lucky and privileged person who went through something horrible. But it happens to people every single day. I am not special because of my psychosis. Still, I will tell you my story, because it's all I've got. Psychosis doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in, slowly at first, like a fog rolling over a road at night. At least that's how it was for me. Insidious, flowing deep into the corners of my mind before I even realized it was there. For me, it began when I couldn't sleep. I would spend hours trying and sleep just never came. I would be up at night, buried in my phone, writing endless notes that made no sense to anyone but me. After about 48 hours of no proper sleep, I began to take micro naps when I would sit still long enough. Most commonly on the toilet, if I'm honest. I would fall asleep without realizing it for a few minutes at a time, and jerk awake with no recollection of sleeping. I would do this while staring at my phone mostly. Just me, asleep, sitting up, staring at my phone inches from my face. I kept feeling like the brightness was too high on my phone as I stared into it for days, but when I went to turn it down, I already found it was as low as possible. It became 4 days without sleep. I began to have vivid dreams during these micro naps. I began to believe these dreams were real. At first, it was just strange thoughts, little things that didn't make sense but felt important. But as the days without sleep stacked up, my mind started to play tricks on me. Connections that weren't there before became undeniable truths. I wasn't just paranoid, I was certain. I believed a powerful group was after me, led by a certain social media CEO. I was convinced they wanted me dead. This was a psychotic delusion, of course, and I was slipping, faster than I could understand. Then suddenly, I was in my living room, waking up from the only sleep I had managed to get in days. In the hours before, in absolute desperation, my boyfriend Mike had given me a small dose of NyQuil, hoping, praying it would quiet my mind long enough for me to sleep. It managed to knock me out long enough that I woke up almost lucid. And that's the first time I remember thinking something was wrong. Neither of us knew what was happening to me. Until that point, I had been adamant about my sanity. I remember screaming in Mike's face that I wasn't manic. I can't be manic. I said it over and over again, like saying it enough times would make it true. Looking back, I was drowning in denial. Mike wasn't the only one who saw it. While I was still trying to convince myself I was fine, he had already called my mom. And somehow she already knew. Before we said a word, before she even saw me, she knew. My mom had seen me like this before. She had seen me unravel. I was 12 years old when someone first said the words, "You have bipolar disorder," to me. It wasn't the first time I had been diagnosed with something, but hearing "you have bipolar disorder" at 12 years old still felt like a gut punch. I had been generally depressed and anxious for a long time, but it wasn't until I started cutting myself regularly that I was taken to a doctor. At the time, I was being abused by someone close to my family. And I was trying. I thought I was screaming for someone to hear me. In hindsight, I wasn't. Or maybe no one could listen. And instead of hearing me, they sent me to a psychiatrist. I won't name him, but let's just say he might have been the least personable doctor I've ever met. His lavender waiting room is still burned into my brain, his Coke bottle glasses and unfocused eyes, the voice that never quite landed, like he was never fully in the room with me. We barely had enough time to come up with a treatment plan before I started having nervous breakdowns at school. I began to scare my peers and cause disturbances in class. It was 8th grade, and they hospitalized me for the first time. I couldn't return to class until I was evaluated. That first hospitalization should have been the moment things got better, but mental illness doesn't work like that. Because here I was again, years later, losing my mind in front of the people who loved me. And my mom, before I said a word, she knew. My mom didn't have to convince me to go with her to the hospital. She barely even had to say the words. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, like she had already seen how this was going to play out. Because we had done this before. She said it was time to go, so I went. I could feel my paranoia begin to boil over on the way there. I was outside for the first time in days. The sun was so bright and the air so crisp. I remember thinking it was a beautiful day and maybe my last. Then we had to go through the ER. This next bit is some of the hardest for me to remember, but I will try my best. The ER was too bright, too loud. People were watching me. I knew they were watching me. Whispering, sideways glances. I could see their phone cameras pointed in my direction. Were they filming me? Were they doctors? Patients? I couldn't tell. I just knew I was being observed. I remember signing myself in. The receptionist looked at me like she couldn't believe I wasn't fighting. The holding area for the psych ward was full, so they stuck me in a chair in between rooms where they could watch me. And after what felt like hours in that plastic chair under security's watchful eyes, they moved me into a room where they could observe me even more closely. Then 3 nurses were on me, holding me still, waiting for a fight that never came. "You're being so cooperative," one of them said, like she didn't expect it, like I was supposed to resist. I could feel the weight of fatigue in my muscles. Had I been resisting before? Or were they just expecting me to? I peed in a cup and changed out of my street clothes. Then it was time to go to the ward. They took my cell phone as they wheeled me back. Slipped it from my hands like I wouldn't notice, but I did. I noticed the absence of it, the empty space in my fingers where it had been. And then it hit me. I wasn't going home. The first thing they do when you enter a psych ward is they take your shoelaces. No belts, no hoodie strings, none of your own clothes for the first 24 hours, while they search through everything you brought with you for contraband, like soda cans and alcohol-based mouthwash. Then they give you rules. A lot of rules. I wasn't really listening. I was too busy staring at the fire alarm, wondering what would happen if I pulled it. I might have asked out loud, I don't know. I remember following my nurse around. As they attempted to do their job and get me what I needed, I would not leave them alone. Eventually, they turned around and were very direct about my need to go sit in the day room. Instead, I began to compulsively pace the halls. Someone handed me a small paper cup of shampoo before my shower. As soon as I was alone, I drank it. Not to hurt myself, no. This was survival. Maybe it was medicine. Maybe they had given it to me for a reason. After all, there were people trying to kill me. And if I wanted to make it out of here, I had to be one step ahead. Nothing made sense, nothing felt real. And yet somehow I was here, sitting in a psych ward, drinking hospital shampoo, convinced people were trying to kill me. I swear, there is a logical series of events that led to this farcical scene. My personal breakdown formula includes unmanaged stress, CPTSD, compulsive pattern recognition, and a healthy dose of undiagnosed bipolar disorder. Also, there was the poster, The Social Network, hung on my bedroom wall since the Christmas of 2013. A gift from a close family friend. It was, and still is, my favorite movie. It had been in the backgrounds of photos, videos, memories, always there. By the time I took it down after my hospital stay, it had seeped into my psyche in ways I couldn't have imagined. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, I was pacing the halls of a psych ward, trapped in a reality I couldn't make sense of. Eventually, I stopped pacing. I sat down. The day room was silent except for the occasional shuffle of grippy socks on tile. The fluorescent lights hummed, too bright for nighttime. I wasn't sure if I'd ever sleep again. I thought maybe I'd feel relieved. Maybe the chaos in my head would slow down now that I was somewhere safe. But instead, I just felt suspended. Like I was watching myself from the outside, stuck in a place I couldn't escape. I have very little linear memory from this time, but the times I do remember are frantic. Like my lucid self is attempting to claw to the surface and overcome my delusionary state. A nurse handed me my first dose of meds in a tiny paper cup. I hesitated. Were they poisoning me? I took them anyway. What was I supposed to do? I had already drank the shampoo. Turns out, it was multiple thousands of milligrams of antipsychotics. And that's when my love-hate relationship with Depakote began. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember the feeling of my body giving up before my mind did. The next thing I knew, the morning had come, and I was still here. I knew this feeling so well, having done this before, but yet I felt the tears come to my eyes. The next few days pass in a blur. I don't remember much, just fragments. The shuffle of socks on linoleum, the murmur of staff conversations at the nurse's station, the weight of sedation pressing me into my mattress, making it impossible to tell where my body ended and the bed began. The first person I remember telling me I had bipolar disorder, again, was Mike. Apparently the doctor had tried the night of my intake, but I wouldn't hear it. And I still wouldn't hear it now. "No, that's not true, you're lying." My voice cracked on the last word. The euphoria of mania had been the first time in months, maybe years, that I had felt good. Now it was gone, ripped away, and in its place was nothing but exhaustion and despair, and he wanted me to believe that this emptiness was the truth, that the light had been the sickness? No, you don't understand, I begged. That wasn't mania, that was me, that was the real me. He shook his head. I could see it in his eyes. The hesitation, the pain, but also the certainty. "I'm sorry," he said, but it wasn't. I felt something rise in my chest. Rage, grief, something unbearable. My hands balled into fists and I cry out, the sound echoing through the day room like a gunshot. The staff turn their heads. A nurse stands up. I feel the sting in my throat as I scream at him. He was wrong. He was lying, and he was trying to take something from me. The staff came and pulled him away. He didn't fight them. And yet the next day he was there. And the day after that. And twice on Christmas. I'm sorry. Okay. After Mike left, I sat there staring at the floor. My hands were still shaking and I wanted to cry, but even that felt impossible. The others barely reacted. No one rushed to comfort me. No one said, "Are you okay? That must have been hard." They had seen this before. To them, I was just another psych patient having another psychotic break. But then, "Hey, are you all right?" I look up. A nurse stood in front of me, crouching down slightly so she wasn't towering over me. And for the first time since I had gotten there, someone was looking at me like a person, not just a case number. Somewhere in the haze, I already knew who she was. Middle school. A face that belonged to another life. I couldn't pull her name from my mind, but the familiarity was there. Unsettling and strange, and yet, right now it didn't matter. Right now she was the only person in this whole place who seemed to care. I nodded, or maybe I didn't. Either way, she did impress me. Just gave me a small nod back and sat beside me for a moment as if to say, "You're still here. You're not alone." Then the Depakote began to creep in like a slow fog. At first, I was just exhausted. My limbs felt heavy, my thoughts blurred at the edges. I still wanted to fight, to yell, to tell someone they were wrong about me, but the fire was fading. The meds wouldn't let me hold on to it. For a while after that, time stopped making sense. Days blurred together, melted into one long, stretched-out moment. Maybe it'd been hours, maybe days. I couldn't tell. I would wake up, bed, dim lights, the murmur of voices outside my door. Wake up again, day room, The TV is humming with activity, but I can't focus on the screen. "Wake up." A nurse handed me a paper cup of water. "Drink," she said. I do. I don't ask why. She asked me when the last time I took a shit was. I answer her. "Wake up. Someone is talking to me." I think I respond. I don't remember what I said. I'm in the day room again. The Big Bang Theory is on TV. I fucking hate that show. I laugh. Who am I? Everything feels slowed down, like I'm moving through mud. Words reach me a second too late. Someone asks me a question and I nod, but I don't know what I'm agreeing to. There's a woman on the ward who I think is my friend. She tries to take my jacket. I don't think we are friends anymore. I go to the quiet room and cry. I feel lost and out of control. I lie in bed. I stare at the ceiling, trying to trace the cracks with my eyes, but my vision won't focus. I think I fall asleep. I think I wake up. I think I do it again and again. At some point, I stop fighting it. I let the days roll over me. Let the meds dull whatever sharp edges are left. I am here, and for now, that's all I know. As it turns out, no one was sure I was going to make it out of this. I had been psychotic for 10 days or so, and at that point it was anyone's guess where this would end up. Mike was there every single day, and they still couldn't tell him how long it was going to be. At this point, I'm tired of it. He's tired of it. Hell, I'm tired of it writing it right now. I wish I could tell you that I was suddenly lucid again. I thought the fog would just lift. I thought one day I'd wake up and it would be over. But I was wrong. It wasn't over. I wasn't just recovering. I was becoming someone new. And for the first time I started to wonder, maybe that wasn't a bad thing. After everything, after all the fear and the loss, I was still here. And maybe, just maybe, that meant something. Recovery is not linear, a cliche you will hear constantly in mental health care, mostly because it's true. The paranoia was still there, thrumming under my skin, but for the first time in days it was quieter. Not gone, just distant, like I had stepped outside of my own mind for a second and realized how far I had gone. Recovery didn't happen all at once. At first it was just a few fleeting moments, tiny cracks of light breaking through. A full night's sleep. A moment where my thoughts didn't feel like they were running ahead of me. The first time I laughed, really laughed after everything, but for every step forward, there were setbacks. The meds slowed me down. I didn't feel like myself, and I kept asking who even was myself now. A cocktail of Depakote and Seroquel was keeping me sane, but at what cost? I had dealt with Seroquel before. It was one of the medications that I was put on for maintenance after my first hospitalization at 12. I gained 80 pounds on the medication and became a severely overweight 5'9" 8th grader. I felt like Frankenstein's monster among my petite peers, so obviously I wasn't a fan. And after about a year on that medication, soon after taking custody, my father told me I couldn't have bipolar disorder, and I believed him. What else was I supposed to do? I went along with it when he took me off these medications because honestly, I didn't want to take them. I felt awful on them, and therefore slipped back into the cycle of hypomania and depression that ruled the first 25 years of my life. But now, sitting in this ward, surrounded by people who refused to let me disappear, I started to wonder, what would have happened if I had believed back then? Would I still be here? Would I still be me? My mother, my brother, my best friend, and Mike, they all held on to me, even when I couldn't hold on to myself. They showed up. Every visit, every phone call, every quiet moment where they just sat with me, reminded me I was still here, that I was still me, even when I wasn't sure who that was anymore. One visit, my mom brought me the original copy of my favorite book as a child, The Prisoner of Azkaban. The thought of it now even makes me want to cry. Its worn pages are bound more with intention and love than its original glue. I treated it like gold. I couldn't focus long enough to read it, but I flipped through the pages. I would hold it, smell it, cradle it while I slept. My best friend even visited me once. In all the years and all the times I had been hospitalized, I had yet to ever have a friend be able to visit me in a mental hospital, to see me at my worst. She tells it like a war story, which it kind of is. When she walked in, I could see she was nervous. Her shoulders were tense, her eyes flickering around, taking in the chaos of the ward. The shouting, the pacing, the woman in the corner making obscene gestures and eventually flashing her. I don't blame her. If I had been in her position, I would have been nervous too. Mike had brought her. He had been my anchor through all this, and now he was bringing in reinforcements. I wasn't sure if he had prepared her for what she was walking into, but still, she stayed. She sat across from me, trying to act normal, trying to meet me where I was. And for the first time in forever, I was just happy to see her. Even in the chaos, even with her nervousness written all over her face, she stayed. She talked to me and treated me like I was still me. She drove 90 minutes for 15 minutes of conversation, and that meant everything. And in that moment, I let myself believe that maybe things were getting better. That maybe with enough time I could claw myself back to something that resembled normal. But clarity is a double-edged sword. At first, I thought I wanted the fog to lift. I thought I wanted to see again. But when it finally did, all I could see was the wreckage. The things I had said, the things I had done, the people I had scared. And worst of all, I couldn't take any of it back. After 2 weeks inpatient, insurance was done with me and I was out of the hospital. It was New Year's Eve of 2018. I was still buzzing with that electric post-manic energy. Too lucid to be fully psychotic, but too wired to be stable. The hospital had let me out, but my mind was still catching up. The world felt too sharp, too real, and I was terrified to go online. But somehow, Facebook felt safe, familiar, a place where I could explain myself, where I could make sense of it all. So I posted. At the time, I thought it was insightful, raw, maybe even profound. Looking back, it was a mess. A stream of consciousness rant, half coherent, oversharing in a way that only a person fresh out of psychosis could. I don't remember the exact words, but I remember how it felt, like throwing myself back into the world before I was ready. At first, the comments trickled in, a few supportive ones, a couple confused messages, then silence, the kind of silence that feels like judgment. My heart started racing, my skin prickled, and I started to think maybe this was a mistake. I reread the post, and that's when it hit me. What the fuck was I thinking? I deleted the post, but it didn't matter. People had seen it, and people knew. I wasn't manic anymore, but I wasn't okay either. And for the first time, I started to wonder if I ever would be. The problem with psychosis is that you don't get to forget. The memories don't come back all at once, but in flashes. Little things. A vague post I don't remember making. a voice message I could barely stand to listen to, sad songs I would scream in my car before this now feel too real, too close for comfort. Every day I remember something else, and every day I wish I hadn't. So I stopped trying. I stopped posting, stopped talking to people. What was there to say? I spent the next 9 months unemployed watching all of MTV's Catfish. At first, it was just something to put on in the background. Noise to drown out the silence, but soon it became a ritual. Entire seasons blurred together day after day, strangers on a screen unraveling in real time, caught in their own delusions. I watched them with a strange kind of detachment. Their mistakes were easier to witness than my own. The days were slow, heavy. I slept too much, but I was always exhausted. My body felt different, sluggish, weighed down by medication, by grief, by something I couldn't name. My mind wasn't racing anymore, but it wasn't sharp either. Just dulled, blunted at the edges. I barely left the house. The thought of running into someone who had seen my Facebook post, someone who knew, it was unbearable. Even when people reached out, I didn't answer. What would I say? Sorry I lost my mind. Sorry I scared you. Sorry it turns out the disability I was diagnosed with as a child was for real, and now I'm undoing more than a decade of mindfuckery? I didn't just lose my job. I lost my sense of time. Some days I'd wake up at noon and feel like I'd barely move before the sun was setting again. Other days I'd be up all night, staring at my phone, scrolling endlessly without really seeing anything. At some point, my mom started asking if I had left the house that week. I lied. Maybe she knew. The thing about coming out of a psychosis is that no one tells you what to do next. There's no guidebook for shame or checklist for rebuilding your life. You just sit with it. And I did. For months. But shame isn't sustainable forever. And at some point it stops feeling like a punishment and just becomes another thing you carry. It settles into you and loses its sharpness. It becomes a part of the landscape. And then, without realizing it, you start to move forward. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic moment of clarity, but in tiny, almost imperceptible ways. A text I actually respond to. A joke I didn't just smile but laughed at. A morning where getting out of bed didn't feel like a monumental task. A moment of vulnerability that didn't make me feel like clawing my own skin off. I wasn't better, not yet, but I was still here. Maybe it was the start of something new. And for now, maybe that was enough. To be continued.